Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our channel. Today, I will tell you one of the most powerful and mysterious stories in history. It is the story of the Titanic, the ship that people thought could never sink. But what really happened? Why did it sink? And what can we learn from it? This story will not only help you improve your English, but it will also inspire you with real stories of bravery, loss, and human spirit. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy this amazing journey through time. The Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a dream. It showed luxury, success, and human progress. Let's go back to the early 1900s, a time when ships were the main way to travel across the oceans. Back then, two companies, White Star Line and Cunard Line, were in a race to build the best and most luxurious ships. Cunard Line already had two famous ships, Lusitania and Mauretania. These ships were fast, but White Star Line wanted something different. They didn't care much about speed. Instead, they wanted big ships with comfort and luxury. White Star Line planned to build three large and beautiful ships, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. Out of these, Titanic became the most well-known, but not for the reason the company wanted. The Titanic was built in Belfast, Northern Ireland, by a shipbuilding company called Harland and Wolff. Construction started in March 1909 and took nearly 3 years. Thousands of workers worked every day to build this massive ship. It was 882 feet, 269 meters long, and 175 feet, 53 meters tall. Imagine, the Titanic was as long as 3 football fields placed together. Now let's talk about why people called the Titanic unsinkable. The ship had 16 watertight compartments. Engineers said, even if 4 compartments filled with water, the ship would still float. This technology was very advanced at the time, and many people believed the Titanic could never sink. The vice president of White Star Line, Philip Franklin, even said publicly, "The Titanic is unsinkable." The public believed it. Newspapers wrote about it. Everyone thought this ship could not sink. Now, let's go inside the Titanic and see why it was called so luxurious. At that time, sailing on the Titanic was not just travel. It was a special experience. The inside of the ship was designed like a 5-star hotel. In fact, many people said the Titanic looked better than top hotels. The wooden walls were hand-carved and polished until they shined. The stained glass windows reflected the sunlight beautifully. The ship had 2 large staircases, and the first-class grand staircase became famous. It had iron railings, gold decorations, and a glass dome above it. It connected many levels of the ship, and was where rich passengers liked to walk and show off their expensive clothes and jewelry. The Titanic had more than beautiful rooms. It also had special features that most ships didn't have. It had a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath for relaxing, and an electric bath, which was very modern at the time. There was also a gym with workout machines, a squash court, a library with books, and 2 barber shops for haircuts. There were restaurants, cafes, and smoking rooms for people to enjoy. One of the restaurants, called the à la carte restaurant, was so fancy that passengers had to pay extra to eat there. The first-class rooms were decorated with silk curtains, elegant furniture, and the best bedding. Even second-class rooms were better than first-class rooms on most other ships. The third-class rooms were simple, but still more comfortable than other ships at the time. The Titanic cost $7.5 million to build in 1912, which is about $200 million in today's money. The ticket prices were also very high. A first-class ticket cost $4,350 back then, which is like paying $100,000 today. Second-class tickets were $60, about $1,500 today. Third-class tickets were between $15 and $40, about $400 to $1,000 today. The Titanic was a ship for the rich, and only the wealthy could afford first-class tickets. When the Titanic was finished, people around the world were excited. It was the biggest ship ever made. Famous actors, rich businessmen, and wealthy families bought tickets months in advance. Everyone wanted to be on the Titanic's first trip, the journey from Southampton, England to New York City, USA. The Titanic left on April 10, 1912. Large crowds came to the port in Southampton to watch the ship leave. Families waved goodbye, and photographers took pictures as the ship slowly sailed away. On board were 2,224 passengers and crew. Some of the richest people in the world were on board, including John Jacob Astor IV, one of the world's wealthiest men, Molly Brown, a famous socialite, and Isidor Straus, the co-owner of Macy's department store, with his wife, Ida Straus. There were also many immigrants traveling in third class who were hoping to begin a new life in America. For them, the Titanic was a symbol of hope and a new chance. At first, everything went well on the Titanic's journey. The ship was moving at a speed of 21.5 knots, which is about 40 kilometers per hour. Everything seemed perfect. Passengers enjoyed the fancy areas, relaxed in their rooms, and ate meals in the elegant restaurants. The weather was calm, and the ocean looked peaceful. But just 2 days after leaving, the Titanic received its first warning about ice. Another ship had sent a message warning about icebergs in the North Atlantic. During April, icebergs were normal in that area, but no one was very worried. People believed the Titanic couldn't sink. The Titanic kept sailing, and by April 14, 1912, it had been at sea for 4 days. Things still seemed perfect. Passengers were enjoying the beautiful ship. The weather was clear, and the sea was calm. But no one knew that this quiet day would turn into a terrible disaster the world would never forget. On April 14, the Titanic received 7 warnings about icebergs from other ships nearby. These messages were sent using Morse code, which is a system of short and long signals. Each message warned the Titanic's crew about large icebergs in the area. But here's what happened with the warnings. Some messages never made it to Captain Edward John Smith because they were not marked as important. Some messages went to the wireless radio operators, who were too busy sending messages for passengers and did not give the warnings much attention. Even the warnings that the captain did see were not taken seriously. Captain Smith still believed the Titanic was safe. The ship was known as unsinkable, and many people trusted that. Even though danger was ahead, the captain didn't slow the ship. The Titanic continued at its top speed of 21.5 knots, or about 40 kilometers per hour. The night of April 14 was very dark. There was no moon, and the stars didn't give enough light. This made it hard to see far ahead. The sea was also very calm. That may sound like a good thing, but it made things worse. Normally, waves splash against icebergs and make them easier to see. But because the sea was so flat, the icebergs were almost invisible. 2 lookout men, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, were watching from the crow's nest, a small platform high above the deck. Their job was to look for danger, especially icebergs. But they didn't have binoculars, because the officer who had them left the ship and forgot to return them. This made their job even harder. At 11:39 p.m., everything changed. Frederick Fleet, sitting in the crow's nest, saw a dark, large shape in front of the ship. At first, he wasn't sure what it was. As the ship got closer, he realized it was a giant iceberg. Fleet quickly rang the warning bell 3 times. This was the signal for danger. Then he picked up the phone and called the bridge, where the officers were. He shouted, "Iceberg! Right ahead!" The officers on the bridge, including First Officer William Murdoch, responded fast. Murdoch told the crew to turn the ship left and to reverse the engines to slow down. But it was too late, just 37 seconds after the iceberg was spotted. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic hit it. The iceberg was massive, around 200 feet high and 400 feet long. Scientists say it was about 100,000 years old and weighed nearly 1.5 million tons. The impact caused pieces of ice to fall onto the deck, but the real damage happened below the water. This brings up one of the biggest questions about the Titanic. How could a block of ice damage a ship made of strong metal? Let's understand by looking at some important facts. First, the size and power of the iceberg. Icebergs are not soft like ice in drinks. They are huge, heavy, and solid. Only a small part shows above the water. Most of it is under the surface, making it strong and dangerous. Second, the steel of the Titanic. The ship was made of steel, but the steel used in 1912 was not as strong as modern steel. In freezing water, it became weak and cracked instead of bending. Third, the rivets. These were the metal pins that held the steel plates together. Some of them were made from weaker material called wrought iron. When the iceberg hit, these rivets popped out, which opened gaps in the ship's side. As the iceberg scraped along the side of the Titanic, it caused serious damage. The iceberg opened 6 long, narrow holes under the waterline of the Titanic. These holes were not large, but water began flooding into the ship very quickly. When the ship hit the iceberg, most passengers didn't know anything had happened. Some felt a small shake, while others heard a strange sound as the iceberg scratched the side of the ship. In the first-class dining room, a few people laughed and asked, "Did we hit something?" But in the engine room, the crew knew something was seriously wrong. Water was rushing into the lower parts of the ship. The Titanic had watertight compartments that were supposed to keep it safe, but the iceberg had damaged more compartments than the ship could handle. Scientists think the iceberg that hit the Titanic came from a glacier in Greenland. It broke off and slowly floated into the North Atlantic over many years. By the time it reached the Titanic, it was one of the biggest icebergs in the area. Its size and weight made it impossible to stop. By midnight, the first 5 compartments of the ship were already full of water. This was a major problem. The Titanic could stay afloat if 4 compartments flooded, but not 5. Captain Smith was told how serious the damage was, and he realized the ship was going to sink. The ship that was once called unsinkable was now sinking. Still, most passengers didn't know what was going on. In the first-class lounge, the band kept playing music, and people were still talking and enjoying themselves. At 12:00 a.m., on April 15, 1912, just 20 minutes after hitting the iceberg, the danger became more clear. Captain Edward John Smith, who had believed the ship was safe just hours before, now had to face the truth. The Titanic was sinking. He called a meeting with his top officers and gave clear instructions. Start lowering the lifeboats, send emergency messages to other ships, and try to keep passengers calm and avoid panic. The Titanic had only 20 lifeboats. This was not enough for the 2,224 people on board. The lifeboats could only hold about 1,178 people. That meant over 1,000 people had no space to escape. This was a big mistake in the ship's design. The ship was made to carry more lifeboats, but the company left them out to make the deck look nicer and more open. As the crew began lowering the lifeboats, the ship's radio operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, started sending emergency messages using Morse code. They used the code CQD, which meant come quickly, danger, and later they also used SOS, a new emergency signal that was easier to understand. One ship, the RMS Carpathia, heard the call. It was about 93 kilometers away. Its captain, Arthur Rostron, quickly ordered the crew to go to the Titanic. But the Carpathia could only travel at 17 knots, and even at full speed, it would take about 4 hours to reach the Titanic. Other ships, like the SS Californian, were closer, but didn't respond. The Californian's radio operator had gone to bed and didn't hear the messages. While the crew worked to launch the lifeboats, fear and confusion spread among the people on board. Many didn't understand how bad the situation really was. The ship still had its lights on, and the band played music to keep passengers calm. In first class, some passengers didn't want to leave the ship. They thought the lifeboats were just for practice or a small safety step. In third class, things were harder. Many people were stuck in the lower parts of the ship and had trouble finding the way to the lifeboats. Many of them didn't speak English, which made it even harder to get help. At 12:30 a.m., the first lifeboat was lowered into the freezing ocean. It could hold 65 people, but only 28 were on board. This happened with many lifeboats. People didn't believe the Titanic would sink, or they thought staying on the ship was safer. As more water filled the Titanic, it became clear that the watertight compartments weren't enough. These compartments were only sealed partway up the ship. Once the water reached the top of one compartment, it spilled into the next one. By 1:30 a.m., the front part of the ship was completely underwater. The ship began to tilt forward, and passengers started to panic. Lifeboats were being filled and lowered quickly. Another danger now appeared: the freezing water. The ocean temperature that night was 2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cold enough to cause hypothermia in just a few minutes. Most people who went into the water without a lifeboat did not survive. The Titanic had 2,224 people on board, but only 705 survived. Most of the survivors were in lifeboats. Around 2:15 a.m., the Titanic reached its breaking point. The water inside the ship had caused so much pressure that the ship started to crack. This is what happened. The front part of the ship, the bow, was already deep underwater, pulling the ship down. The back part, the stern, lifted high into the air. Both pieces sank separately. The front sank first, going all the way to the ocean floor. The back stayed afloat for a short time before it also went down. At 4:00 a.m., about 2 hours after the Titanic disappeared, the RMS Carpathia arrived. The Carpathia crew started rescuing the survivors from the lifeboats. They worked hard to save people from the freezing ocean. Many survivors were in shock, crying, or suffering from cold. Some were too weak to climb up and had to be pulled in with ropes. By 8:30 a.m., all the survivors had been brought on board, and the Carpathia began heading to New York. The people on board left behind the broken Titanic, and over 1,500 people who had died. After the Titanic sank, the world wanted to know how such a great ship could sink and why so many people died. During the investigation, a shocking detail came out about another ship, the SS Californian, which was only 37 kilometers, 20 miles away from the Titanic. The SS Californian, a British steamship, was also sailing in the North Atlantic that same night. Unlike the Titanic, the Californian had stopped for the night because of ice warnings. It was surrounded by icebergs, and its engines were turned off. Around 11:00 p.m., the crew saw a big ship in the distance. It was the Titanic. From the deck, they could see its lights. When the Titanic started to sink, its crew sent up rocket flares into the sky. These were emergency signals meant to get attention from nearby ships. The crew on the Californian saw these flares. Second, Officer Herbert Stone told Captain Stanley Lord about them. Stone also said the ship looked like it had stopped, but Captain Lord did not think it was serious. He believed maybe the ship was having a party, which was common on ships with rich passengers. One of the biggest mistakes the Californian made was turning off its wireless radio. The radio operator, Cyril Evans, had gone to sleep at 11:30 p.m., just before the Titanic began sending SOS signals. This was a terrible mistake. If the Californian's radio had stayed on, it would have heard the Titanic's cries for help and could have responded in time. The Californian was close enough to reach the Titanic before many people died in the cold water. Could it have saved more lives? Most experts say yes. The Californian was only 20 miles away, a distance it could have traveled in about 2 hours. While it may not have arrived before the ship sank, it could have helped rescue many from the water. The Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m., and the Californian could have arrived by 2:30 or 3:00 a.m. That would have been much earlier than the Carpathia, which arrived at 4:00 a.m. Even saving 100 or 200 more people would have made a big difference. Because of the controversy with the Californian, new rules were made for ships. One rule was that radios must always be on, so that no emergency messages would be missed. Another rule was that any rockets seen in the night sky should always be treated as a sign of danger. Also, ships were told they must check on any strange activity, like flares or stopped ships nearby. Captain Stanley Lord's name was hurt by the investigation. He spent the rest of his life trying to explain what happened, but people still blamed him until his death in 1962. The Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of human dreams, wealth, and progress. But in one cold night, all of that was lost in the Atlantic Ocean. Even today, over 100 years later, the Titanic is still one of the most talked about stories in history. When the Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, it disappeared into the deep ocean. For many years, no one knew where it was. People could only guess what it looked like under the water. Many thought the wreck would never be found because it was too deep, 12,500 feet 800 meters underwater. That was far too deep for early explorers. But in 1985, 73 years later, the Titanic was finally found. Dr. Robert Ballard, a deep-sea explorer, and his team used special technology to find the sunken Titanic. They sent a robotic submarine to search the ocean floor, and what they saw was amazing. The front of the ship, the bow, was mostly still together, but the back part, the stern, was broken and twisted. This showed proof that the ship had split in two before it sank. Around the wreck, they found shoes, dishes, suitcases, and other personal items from passengers. These items were sad reminders of the people who had died. Since the ship was found, scientists have been studying the wreck. They discovered that bacteria and salt water are slowly destroying the ship's metal. Experts say that by the year 2030, the Titanic might fully disappear, leaving only memories behind. Even with that, people are still very interested in the Titanic. It's not just about the ship itself, but also what it stands for. It shows the dream to build something amazing. the sadness of thinking nothing could go wrong, and the human stories of people who survived or lost their lives with bravery. In 2012, to remember the 100th anniversary of the Titanic sinking, an Australian billionaire named Clive Palmer shared a bold idea. He wanted to build a new ship, like the Titanic, called Titanic 2. This ship would look just like the original, with grand staircases, fancy dining rooms, and old-style rooms. But this time, it would have modern safety features like more lifeboats and better navigation tools to make sure the same tragedy never happens again. Titanic 2 was planned to take the same journey from Southampton to New York. While many people were excited about this plan, the project has had many delays and problems. Until now, Titanic 2 has not been finished. Still, this idea shows how much people care about the memory of the Titanic. In total, 705 people survived the sinking. Most of them were women and children. Over 1,000 men died because they gave up their places in the lifeboats for others. The Titanic disaster taught the world many lessons. First, being too sure of yourself can be dangerous. People believed the Titanic couldn't sink. This made them careless, so they didn't put enough lifeboats on the ship and didn't pay enough attention to ice warnings. Second, we must respect nature. The iceberg reminded us that nature is strong and unpredictable. Even the most powerful machines humans build can be damaged by nature. Third, always be ready for the worst. After the Titanic sank, new safety rules were made for all ships. Now, every ship must have enough lifeboats for all passengers. Radios must stay on 24/7, and safety drills are required. The Titanic story is a mix of beauty, sadness, and mystery. People are interested in it because it teaches an important lesson about human dreams and mistakes. The wreck, deep in the ocean, is like a time machine, showing us a moment in history. But the most important part is the people, their bravery, sacrifice, and kindness. These stories are why the Titanic is still remembered. The story of the Titanic isn't just about a tragedy. It's about what we can learn and how we can become better. Here are some lessons. Never give up. The people who survived had to face great pain and loss, but many were able to rebuild their lives. Their strength is something we can all learn from. Always be prepared. Life can change suddenly. Whether it's a ship accident or a personal problem, being ready can help a lot. Learn from mistakes. The Titanic disaster helped make better safety rules that have saved many lives. Mistakes are not the end. They help us grow and improve. So, the Titanic is not only a story about a ship, it is a story about people. It reminds us of what humans can do and what we need to be careful about. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that will help you learn English and learn about the world. And in the comments, tell us, what part of the Titanic story touched your heart the most? Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.